I think if you ask the average Kiwi, they'd sort of say, oh yeah, we've got about 30% of it is protected. You can kind of develop that kind of feeling because there's so many stories that come from marine reserves where we've got all of this biodiversity and, there's cool stories and stuff happen. But we're one of the worst in the world. We've got less than 1% of our EEZ is protected to international sort of high protection standards.
Do you think, we as people understand the health of the ocean?
No, definitely not. We definitely don't have that sense of loss. We don't understand the complexities of the pressures. Yeah, and really with the ocean, all you have to do is just leave it alone. It's not that hard. So I really think that there's even more than terrestrial ecosystems. There's huge promise for change in the oceans. It's a really exciting space to be working.
Hello, kia ora. I'm Anna.
And I'm Callum from Conservation Amplified.
And you're listening to the People Helping Nature podcast.
Our mission is to make conservation mainstream, one topic at a time.
In this episode, we're taking a look at our marine environment, the dire state it's in, innovative ways that groups of people are restoring it, and much more. And we're thrilled to be joined by Shaun Lee. Shaun is involved in a wide range of marine conservation mahi, particularly focused on the Hauraki Gulf. Welcome, Shaun.
Great to be here.
Kia ora. Thank you for coming on today.
Would you like to start by introducing yourself and your involvement in marine conservation?
All right, sure. So, ko Shaun Lee toka whenua. I'm a designer, illustrator, photographer who does a lot of marine advocacy work, particularly in the Hauraki Gulf, and I work on both passive and active restoration projects.
Thank you for introducing yourself, and we'll be talking about the passive and active restoration a little bit later on in our episode. But just to create an understanding for our audience and have a baseline to work off, what's the current state of our marine environment here in Aotearoa, New Zealand?
Yeah, so we've got a huge marine environment in Aotearoa. I think it's one of the fourth largest EEZs in the world, and probably per capita we're at the top. So it's 15 times our land mass. So a really, really huge area. And it's under huge pressures. So basically we're putting too much bad stuff into it and we're taking too much good stuff out. And that problem sort of exists right around the whole ocean. It's all one big interconnected space. There's this huge amount of biodiversity in the marine environment too. So I think it's about 44% of our marine species are endemic, so found nowhere else in the world, and about 80% of our biodiversity, so just species counts, are actually marine species. So we don't pay our ocean the attention it really deserves in terms of conservation. And in terms of threats, fishing or overfishing, that's a pretty massive one. But it's also a really easy one for us to manage. You can just stop it tomorrow if you wanted to. Whereas the pollution problems and stuff, especially your non-point source pollution, when it sort of slowly comes dribbling in, those ones are much harder to manage. And of course, climate change. So that's having a massive impact on the ocean. The ocean sort of sucked up about 25% of our excess carbon dioxide globally since the 1970s, I think. But it's absorbed about 90% of that excess heat. So it's really not proportionate. We are loading it up with heat, which is nice for me in some ways as a diver. It is getting this cold. I've been in the water a lot this season. We're about 5 degrees warmer than normal in the Hauraki Gulf, and it's been a great start for the year. But I'm really worried about what's going to happen later in the year as that heat stress really, really kicks in. It's different in New Zealand. We're warming up a lot faster than the places in the world. We've got some sort of shifting oceanographic currents, and so we're warming 34% faster than other places in the world.
Wow. So to summarize, would you say there's the stuff we're taking out of the ocean, bad stuff we're putting in, and then the changes to the overall composition of that mega habitat?
Yeah, those are the 3 ways I broadly categorize ocean stress.
So as far as the stuff we're taking out of it, fishing's one part of it. What about resource extraction? How is that affecting our ocean?
Yeah, that's a really growing threat globally. A lot of talk about seabed mining, a lot of resistance, the community level, but government kind of stalling it in some places, but it's quite intimidating, quite scary. We've been doing it for a long time in some places in New Zealand, like sand mining, and we've seen a lot of negative impacts there. Basically, you're physically removing the habitat. Like, it just can't get any worse in terms of an impact, right? Like, if we think about a definition of ecocide, when you permanently destroy an ecosystem, like that's what seabed mining is, and it can be particularly devastating.
Yeah, right. And I guess habitat composition's a big one, right? Like we think about, okay, I'll catch all these snapper, but then you don't think because the snapper were eating the kinner, now there's kinner barrens and that takes away the kelp. And I guess when you're putting pollution from waterways into the ocean, yes, there's the destruction of fish, but the change of the habitat's a big one. So how are you seeing the habitat composition change?
So we, on the west coast of New Zealand, we're getting heat stress and kelp die-off from that, and especially in the further south in New Zealand, we're getting kelp die-off from coastal darkening, so too much sediment in the water, not enough the light getting down to the kelp, and kelp dying off that way. And then the example you mentioned with snapper, especially in northeastern New Zealand, is quite interesting and a bit more complex. Here we've got this sort of trophic cascade where the kinner population is exploding because we've taken out too many of their key predators. So it's yes, snapper, but probably more crayfish, colder, that predate these urchins. And when we have this explosion of kinner and they go nuts and they eat all the kelp, they don't disappear. They kind of can sit around being all starving and hungry in this kind of zombie state, and they are not good for harvesting. Like, no one wants to eat those kinner. Like, people who do eat kinner prefer to take them around the edge of reefs where they are healthy. So it's not good for the kinner themselves either to sort of be doing this sort of massive population explosion. And it's really gotten out of control in the last few decades. So we're at 34% kinner barren on our northeastern reefs, which is a real low point. And those areas where we've lost that kelp, we've lost those forests, that's like kind of the best biogenic habitat, like the most complex life-forming habitat that we have. And there's all this kind of extra surface area on kelp reefs, which is just awesome for like fish nurseries and stuff. There's all this extra productivity in those areas. So we really need to do a better job of looking after them.
You just stated a lot of information there, which is obviously coming from monitoring the ocean. So how is that happening at the moment across Aotearoa? Like, how can we gauge how good our marine health is?
There's a lot of different ways we're doing it. We've got everything from, I'm just thinking about like the smallest stuff. Like, you can look at satellite imagery and look at the color of the ocean and decide, yeah, we've got algae growing here and not growing here at different seasons and stuff. So you can kind of do forecasting like that. That's sort of just starting up. Like, we're not doing a lot of proactive fisheries management with that, but that's an interesting area. We can put cameras under the water and we can do diver transects and stuff. There's lots of things that individual people can do. I'm a big citizen scientist, so I do a lot of data recording and just freely sharing information myself. It's my favorite thing to do in the ocean. It just makes going out on the water a bit more meaningful, I guess. But unfortunately, too much of our data is just coming from fisheries management. How many fish have been landed in any particular season is how we decide how many fish are going to be taken out next season. And it's not good enough. We need to do a much better job of managing these fisheries. In the Hauraki Gulf, we've got huge numbers of fish populations that have never had a stock assessment. So we don't know how they're going, how they're projected to go, really what their role is in the ecosystem. That's the Hauraki Gulf. Like, that's the water around Auckland that's been studied the most in New Zealand. Like, it's where Auckland University is and has the marine lab and stuff. So we really need to do a lot more work. I think there's just a problem with it being a little bit unseen because it's under the water, but it's also difficult. I've lost a lot of marine electronics to the ocean. Like, these things don't mix that well.
Yeah, it's a bit of a harsh environment, eh?
Yeah, Tangaroa is a tough client. Yeah.
Speaking of seeing and experiencing the ocean, which is how you reconnect or deepen your connection with any ecosystem, really. Like, we do have marine reserves around Aotearoa, New Zealand. For example, Goat Island is probably the most famous one up in the Auckland region. What are they doing well, and how is that contributing to the overall situation?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up. That's another way that we're actually doing monitoring. And we've had a really interesting case study recently where the fishing industry were taking out a certain amount of crayfish and saying that means that we've got this much crayfish left and things are going fine. And everybody like me who puts their head under the water was going, what? This is just crazy. Like, I'm just not seeing crayfish anymore. They're functionally extinct. What are you talking about? And scientists at Auckland University up at Lee, who work right next to that marine reserve at Goat Island, did a bunch of studies sort of inside and outside marine reserves and comparing the sizes of the different populations. And so the fisheries people were saying the stocks, the population of crayfish is like here, based on a natural biomass of about here. And by comparing the amount of crayfish inside and outside marine reserves and using marine reserves as kind of like a way of saying this is 100% biodiversity, we were able to get quite a different picture of how the crayfish population was going. And that data went all the way through the court system and has actually impacted how that fish population is getting managed. And now Fisheries New Zealand are changing tack and starting to think about managing that fish population differently so that it's more ecosystem based. So they're thinking about the role that crayfish play in those kelp forests, which is really good. It's been tough. It's been years of battling and education, but we're getting there. We're making some progress.
Yeah, I guess monitoring, it's easy to take the data that you get for fact, but you're only ever looking at a small subsection of reality. There's always a vested interest in the monitoring, right? If a fisheries industry is doing the monitoring, there's an interest in underplaying the data. If a government department who maybe is influenced by lobbying is doing the monitoring, I mean, it's established that will impact how funding is allocated, what data comes to light. Do you see that having a big impact on the data that influences policy and legal decisions?
Yeah, we've got some problems where the amount of money that's put aside that comes kind of like it's attached to how much money is coming from the fishing industry via taxes and stuff that is put aside for marine research, and it's not growing. It's anything, it's shrinking, but we need more data than ever before. So it's really frustrating. And there's been a lot of criticism that the New Zealand fishing industry has captured the regulatory body, Fisheries New Zealand. David Parker said that in the House, I think in 2018, but he became fisheries minister for a number of years and made some good decisions while he was there, but he still wasn't able to undo those big systemic kind of problems with how we're funding the science. And we're definitely not getting enough fisheries independent data to get those extra inputs into decisions.
Yeah, I find it personally crazy because it's not a political topic so much as it is a science and data topic. It just seems like a logical course of action, like get the right data and make decisions based on sound, established, proven science, not what gets volleyed around the house.
Yeah. I just don't understand. Like, so much important work has been done by students getting their PhDs, and I don't understand it. I do a lot of science communication, and there's a lot of really good and important work, and need to do so much more.
Yes, yeah, fully agree. So how much of our marine environment is actually protected here in New Zealand?
I think if you ask the average Kiwi, they'd sort of say, yeah, we've got about 30% of it is protected. You can kind of develop that kind of feeling because there's so many stories that come from marine reserves where we've got all of this biodiversity and, there's cool stories and stuff happen. But we're one of the worst in the world. We've got less than 1% of our EEZ is protected to international sort of high protection standards.
When you say EEZ, can you just clarify what that means, please?
Yeah, that's our exclusive economic zone. That's an area around New Zealand that has been sort of given to us by the United Nations and said, okay, that's your territory. that you can manage and you sort of have a responsibility to look after properly. And so in terms of responsibility, we're doing a really bad job. So you can compare us at that less than 1% level. We're right down the bottom with China and Russia. So it's really shocking.
How do other countries compare? Like, we've got less than 1% of our exclusive economic zone. What would, say, America or Australia? Do you know how these countries protect their oceans?
Not right off the top of my head. I think Australia's around 10% or so, but I think both the UK and America kind of cheat a little bit because they've got overseas territories. So a lot of their marine protected areas are a long way offshore off the mainland, and territories like Hawaii or whatever that, are not really attached to the mainland. So globally, we're still not anywhere close to 30%. And the United Nations has sort of set that goal of 30% of land and ocean protected by 2030. And we're definitely not on path to hitting that, which is quite disappointing. We've made some good progress recently with the High Seas Treaty. So that's the area outside the EEZ. And there's 74 different countries that have signed up to protect big areas of open ocean there. And so that's one way we might get to that 30% kind of target, I guess. But I think a lot of that area isn't impacted by fishing in the same way that it is closer to the mainland, where you get more biodiversity. Basically, as you get closer to the mainland, the biodiversity kind of goes up. You get more complex habitats and more variation. And so we're not really if we protect a huge amount of the high sea and don't protect stuff close to the mainland, we're not protecting 30% of habitats.
I wasn't aware that we're at the bottom of the list, which is pretty embarrassing, seeing that we're an island, right? The mainland of New Zealand is just one big island, and we're surrounded by the ocean.
Islands, but...
Well, lots of islands. Anyway, so the protection that's currently happening, where is it located? And you somewhat already answered it, but is it adequate?
Yes, 100% not adequate. In the Hauraki Gulf, we were sitting at less than 1%. We've just recently changed things around a bit in the Gulf. We've dramatically increased the amount of protection. So we've gone from less than 1% up to about 6%, which is really cool. The protection areas are kind of experimental. We haven't done them like this before because there's going to be customary take and a little bit of commercial fishing in 3 of the HPAs. So not much, but still some. And we don't know exactly how that's going to go, like whether we're going to get similar kind of biodiversity outcomes to what we get with marine reserves. But I'm optimistic, and it's a huge step forward in the Hauraki Gulf. Of course, I want to see that 30% protection, and 6% to 30% is still a huge gap. And I personally think it should be 50%, but I can settle for 30%. And there's just a lot more work to be done. In New Zealand, most of the protection, kind of like those other countries I was talking about before, is really far offshore. So there's a couple of really remote islands way off New Zealand in the sub-Antarctics and in the top actually around the Kermadec and stuff where we've got some quite big areas, and that's what's making up most of our 1%. It would be more like 0.01% if we didn't have those areas. So it's really sad. You can't even see it on a map. It's just pinpricks.
So you've mentioned 30% protection a few times now. Can you explain to us where that number comes from and what that would look like if we were to continuously aim for that?
Oh, thank you for that. That's a nice idea. I think if we had 30% of New Zealand protected, that would be incredible. That would be really exciting. And that's a beautiful vision. It came from the United Nations as part of that 30 by 30 goal. They had to protect all different habitats around the world. I don't know a lot more about it than that. The protection standard they do have is pretty soft. It's not as rigid as our Marine Reserves Act. So an area only has to be protected for a minimum of 10 years, and it can allow some indigenous take and stuff. So it's pretty soft. I think it's definitely doable. It's something we should definitely be aspiring to.
So I'm just coming back to the protection that's in the Hauraki Gulf. A few people have said to me in the last few weeks, I don't understand why we're not allowed to fish for our family, but there's commercial and customary take allowed. I don't understand it. I haven't looked into the reasons why so much, but do you have a perspective or an understanding of why the regulation was set out in that way?
Yeah, so one of the reasons that we don't have more marine protection in New Zealand is that the Marine Reserves Act is quite old. So it was written in 1971 and it was up for review in the 1980s. We didn't fix it then, and there's been multiple attempts at it since then. So the legislation is just out of date. It just doesn't incorporate any other views or reasons to do marine protection really other than the scientific one. So we do need new tools in New Zealand for marine protection because there are different values associated with it. And so what we've done in Hauraki Gulf with the Hauraki Gulf Marine Protection Bill is we're kind of trying something new. We're taking into account customary practices. So doesn't mean that anybody Māori can just go out there and fish whenever they want. You have to have a permit and you're doing it because there's a tangi or some cultural event that you're going fishing for. How much of that will happen and where it will happen, you just don't know. That's sort of an experimental component to it, and there's valid reasons to be concerned about what impacts that will have or cultural clashes and stuff around those practices, and we'll learn a lot there. The commercial stuff just shouldn't happen. Just really, really frustrating. Process-wise, we went through a marine spatial planning process that ended in 2016, so a long time ago. It then went through 2 huge rounds of public feedback where I said, we need much bigger spaces, and other people said, we need less of this. And then the select committee heard it all and made no changes to the bill. And that's, obviously led by this government with all its commercial fishing interests and stuff. And I thought that was amazing. I was quite surprised, and so it was good. And then at the last minute, our Minister for Fisheries worked quite hard behind the scenes and was lobbied quite extensively by the seafood industry to allow commercial fishing in 2 HPAs. And he's kind of done it mostly, I think, as a way to kind of compromise the bill or compromise the look of the bill. I don't think it'll have that much actual impact, and that's for a few reasons. One is the fishing method only happens in winter. It's called ring net fishing, so it only targets certain kinds, a few species like mullet and prawley in the shallows, so it's not going out over the reefs, and it's been grandfathered, so there's only 5 individual fishers who are allowed to go into those areas, and they'll disappear over time. It's also going to be reviewed in 3 years, and Labour has also promised to get rid of this loophole for commercial fishers. So at the moment, I think it's about 20 grand worth of fish that's going to come out of these areas, so it's pretty small stuff, so we don't need to worry about it as much as people are.
Yeah, right. It's funny though, because regardless of the size and scale, the optics that I can't get food for my family, but the commercials are allowed, and I'm understanding of the need for collection for tangi, and that comes with kaitiakitanga responsibilities. But to your average Joe, they think, oh, you're kicking us out, but you'll let the commercial and the iwi interests in. It looks so bad, even if the reality isn't quite there. I think it's a good way of compromising the bill if you wanted to.
It's definitely easier when you're arguing for marine protection or working on it to sort of say, okay, no take for everyone. It feels nice and equal. We did have in the bill biodiversity objectives. So even though iwi would still have the right to do some customary take in these areas, they would also be signing up to having a certain amount of abundance, having us playing that kind of role as kaitiaki, and that was kind of like written into the bill. But the government also removed that, and that's a bit of a concern. I'm worried about not having that responsibility also for iwi. So we'll see how it evolves. We're going to learn a lot. If the things in the ocean weren't going bad so fast, I'd be happy to just sit back and wait and let that experiment play out for 10 years. But at the moment, I think we just need more marine protection everywhere as soon as possible. And I really don't care too much what kind of marine protection. Like, there's a lot of different ways. You can just exclude certain kinds of fishing methods. You can just limit catches. You can do seasonal limitations. You can do size limitations. Like, I'm on board for all of it. If you need my help with it, I'm there. I'm keen to help.
Yeah, I happen to think, like, if people get caught up in their own interests and what's in it for me, this is a problem, that's a problem. And I always come back to saying, look, there's an ecosystem out there. If the ecosystem's functioning well, we're all good. But if it's not, then we all have a problem, and our next generation has an even bigger problem. Like, it's that simple. Like, there's an ecosystem that we need to look after, and if that's not there, we're all going to die out. Like, it's it's no more complex than that at a foundational level. But then we get into the politics. But anyway, let's move on to, I just want to jump in a time machine for a moment and rewind it a bit. We are a nation surrounded by water. It's a core part of our identity. It's a core part of our culture. And in our not so distant past, our waters were so abundant with life that it's hard to imagine what it was like. Hearing the stories from 50, 100 years ago, from the 1800s, it's just mind-blowing. I can't visualize the kind of catches people had. Really good book by Robert Venel, Secrets of the Sea. If you're interested, take a look at that. But I'd love it if you could just walk us through how we got to this state, from abundance to fighting to even put minimal marine protections in place. Like, what was the journey that got us here?
Yeah, definitely second that read. I think there's a couple of my photos in Robert's book. I mean, it's just over extraction, and it didn't just start with Europeans. There were big losses. A lot of people don't know we had sea lions in the Hauraki Gulf. It's hard to imagine that sort of thing. You can look at the middens and just see a lot more diversity and different species there. So we're learning a lot from those kind of cultural libraries, I guess, about what's changed over time. And there's been some really good studies. There's an amazing one by Pinkerton et al. In 2015, I think, which really looked at loss in the Hauraki Gulf Marine Park. And it's one of the few places where we've got some really solid data on what's been lost. And it's pretty bad. 67% of our seabirds just gone. 86% of our sharks gone. And it's our rays and stuff as well. Like, our marine mammals probably hit the hardest in some ways. We've lost 97% of those. Think about, people see a dolphin or an orca or something, and that's the highlight of their summer, like that's, like a peak experience for people. And yeah, what we've done to them is just terrible. But we are seeing some of that come back. Like, I study kikino, New Zealand fur seals, and that's a great example where I'm not wearing a first skin coat at the moment. Like, we've changed culturally, and the animal's now protected, and we have seen that population slowly come back into the Hauraki Gulf Marine Park. We're still a long way away. We don't have any breeding colonies here yet, but it's starting to come back. Where it really kind of gets depressing, I guess, when I think about loss, is the habitat loss. So I spend a lot of time on the soft sediment areas, which take up most of the seafloor, compared to other divers who spend most of their time on reefs. And we've just seen so much impact there. We've seen so much loss. We've lost 100% basically of kutai, the green lip mussels that once carpeted the Hauraki Gulf Marine Park.
That's really crazy. I think every time I think of marine conservation, and I'm guilty of it myself quite often, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. We are so removed from it as certain individuals. And I also think it's easy to think that what you know is normal. And I think there's really been a shift of baselines here in this country, getting used to less and not understanding what we actually had in the past.
Yeah, 100%. I worked on the last 4 State of the Gulf reports as a design illustrator, and every time I try and include a historic photo from like the 1920s or 40s or something to show what was being caught, and you can see these huge numbers of snapper from very short fishing trips, big fish, and then also different species like hardbooker getting caught in the shallows and stuff like that. And we don't notice the change. Like, there's this kind of loss of information between each generation called sliding baseline syndrome. I've experienced it in my own family. Like, my grandfather's got these stories, or even my father tells me this one about when he was a kid standing up on the cliffs and seeing snapper spawning. Like, there were so many of them in the water. The top of the water was like frothing and pink. No one's seen that in decades, and we don't notice it because it's happening so gradually, the loss. Yeah, one of the ways that I connect with it when I'm out and about is I often dig down into the sediment. So there's this sort of thick layer of fine silt, especially the most degraded parts of the Hauraki Gulf. And if you dig down underneath it, you can find all these shells, not just those mussel shells that I was talking about earlier, but scallop shells, oyster shells, various kinds of dog cockles and stuff. And it shows you the seafloor of what's living down there has really dramatically changed. There's this library sitting just under the surface. One of the things that really bugs me too is like when I pull out the mussel shells, they're not small, they're huge, these big old mussels. And you can see them in the historic photos from the dredges when they were pulling them up in the 1960s. And they're big as the fish's feet. They're absolutely massive. And so the big old animals are really missing from the system.
I often see people online saying, yeah, well, if you think the fish is bad, it's just because you don't know how to fish. I'm getting plenty of fish, so I don't know what your problem is. I think it's important to realize that these catches that people were getting, say, 50, 100 years ago or more, were with bad tools, bad techniques in the shallows. And now we've got depth sounders, we've got pheromone-based soft plastics, we've got all this amazing technology. We have so much knowledge of the fish, like they don't stand a chance now. And that doesn't mean that they're abundant. It just means that we're so much better at fishing and we have all this technology. So I think that can kind of mask the real health of the environment.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah. My father's got stories about fishing without bait. Stories about being able to walk down onto the reef, just wading around and catching crayfish with your toes. Try and do that.
I think you'd be very sad, almost starving on the beach if you were to try that these days.
Yeah.
But in your experience, we established that we need more marine protection and we need to increase it. What are people's attitudes towards that? Is it something that we genuinely want as a nation and prepared to act on?
I think the general public definitely want it. And when we poll them, virtually everybody agrees that 30% of the ocean should be protected. Even the people who recreationally fish seem to agree. So the Hauraki Gulf Forum did a poll a couple of years ago and they had 72% of recreational fishers saying, yeah, sign me up for 30%. So where things tend to fall over is when somebody actually proposes something and it's in their backyard and they're going to lose their fishing spot. And that can be difficult, but it's surmountable. Like, so on Waiheke Island, we went through that process a couple of years ago and we actually got really good local support. So I think it was something like 93% support overall from the islanders for putting marine reserve where we proposed. And I think that one was like 5 times as big as Goat Island. Like, it was quite a significant proposal. So I definitely think that's surmountable. Where we tend to have the biggest problems is around certain kinds of lobby groups. It's definitely getting it across the line with iwi. That can be difficult, but it's organizations like the Maori Commercial Fishing Organization, Te Ao Kai Moana, that really intimidating. They got a lot of lawyers, very active in this space. And then, of course, the commercial fishers will always try and put up a bit of a fight as well. But yeah, there's still not enough rationale against marine protection. Like, I still don't understand why we don't have that 30%. I think it's achievable in my lifetime. Like, I'm definitely shooting for it.
Do you think, like, we as people understand the health of the ocean?
No, definitely not. We definitely don't have that sense of loss. We don't understand the complexities of the pressures and stuff. And we've just talked about a few of them today. So many more, land-based runoff, your microplastics, your heavy metals and stuff. There's new things like endocrine disruptors and stuff that are coming through, and the medications that are going out through the stormwater. So it's really quite scary how much stuff is ending up in the ocean. It's just because of gravity, right? Like, there's no such place as a wave. Like, everything just goes downstream, and we're not doing enough with our freshwater protection. It's so that if you talk to anyone about freshwater, you know about the huge problems with both human poo, animal poo going into our waterways. And we really need to do a lot more to get these nutrients out of the system. We've got places like in the Firth of Thames here in the Hauraki Gulf where we're starting to see the signs of dead zones turning up. You basically have too much nutrients, you get an algal bloom, and that should be great, right? Like, everything loves algae, but there's productivity at the top of the food chains, lots of stuff for things to eat, but there isn't enough stuff eating it, and it falls down to the bottom of the ocean when it dies, and then the bacteria just go nuts and they just explode on the bottom of the seafloor. And when they do that, they use up all the oxygen, and we need oxygen in the water for fish to breathe. And so basically there's this giant dead zone. And if you're a fish that can swim away from it, fine. But if you're something like a shellfish or a crab or something, or a starfish, you are going to have that big area of zero oxygen water just sort of move over you and over your neighbors and move around on the bottom of the seafloor, just killing everything in its path. So these are really big, scary things that can happen in the ocean that we're not paying enough attention to.
It's so much complexity, and I don't want to simplify it down into things that are gloss over the details, but when I talk to people about the need for more marine protection, a common objection I hear is that what does it matter what we do? Larger, more powerful countries are harvesting way more than us. Our actions are only a drop in the ocean. Why should we suffer if it's just going to be in vain because others are going to keep exploiting? And I can empathize with that, but it doesn't solve the problem. And I often struggle to respond. I'm like, this is still our home, it's our heritage. But how do you think about that? And how do you approach that line of thought?
I actually haven't run up against that one too much. I mean, there's definitely, if I don't take this big fish, then somebody else will kind of mentality. So, but in terms of like actually, like, why don't we come up with a rule and let's do something good? Like, I think most people are reasonably on board with it. There's definitely some big concerns about overfishing, and that Chinese fleet is insane. Like, it's really scary, and it's a political tool. So there are some huge global big impacts that are happening out there. But when we do protect stuff in New Zealand, we do see change. We are getting good outcomes from it, and you can see that when you experience it yourself by just going for a swim in a marine reserve. Like, these are my favorite places in the world. Fantastic. You can have that kind of experience that's really hard to find. Like, I do a lot of work with shorebirds, and it's really hard to kind of get close to them and have that experience of abundance. Like, every now and again you'll get a big flock of goblins or something fly over you, and you might get a few thousand. It's more likely to be a few hundred, but if you can get 1,000 flying past, it's pretty exciting. Your heart kind of jumps, kind of thing. But I can get that any day at a marine reserve. I can just pop up to the core nights and just be surrounded by this ball of fish. It's just really exciting and fun. And so when we can see and experience those local benefits immediately, it's pretty hard to argue with.
Thank you for bringing this up. This is an amazing point. And I also think with our marine protection, we need to do that for ourselves, New Zealand, Aotearoa, not for a global goal. Yes, of course, contribute to that. But it comes down to what we want to preserve for us as a nation, what the health and the positive benefits that come with that for us and our own well-being, because it is complex, but more so interconnected beyond our understanding, I think. So I think, to me, that's a key point people often miss. It's doing it for us, not for everyone else out there.
Absolutely. And I think there's a sort of growing awareness, especially from some fishers who understand a little bit about fish biology. There's this cool thing in the ocean where what's kind of weird, like, you don't see a lot of parenting happen in the ocean. So you don't see mama fish with baby fish, kind of doesn't happen, right? So how it works is most things in the ocean are like what we call broadcast spawners. Just kind of shoot out a bunch of eggs and sperm and cross their fingers. And if you're doing that, the way to win at that game is to produce a lot of eggs and sperm. You've got to have really big gonads. So the fish with the biggest gonads are the older ones, and they get bigger and bigger and bigger with age. They don't stop. They don't kind of retire or whatever, right? And so the classic example I like to give is that 176 centimeter snapper puts out the same amount of eggs as, I think it's 30 pan-sized snapper, like a 30 centimeter sized snapper. So it's a huge, like, disproportionate contribution, right? And so that's what we see in marine reserves. So if you go for a swim at Goat Island, there's all these big old snapper, not just the occasional small one, which is what you see outside the reserve. And they have a really massive disproportionate contribution to the fishery. Can't remember the numbers, but it was something like, it's measured in the millions of dollars. The value that the Goat Island Marine Reserve, just one tiny marine reserve, has for the wider fishery. As nurseries are not quite the right word, because they're looking after the big old fish, not the little fish, but it's a place to protect big animals that can produce just heaps and heaps of eggs and sperm, and really keep the oceans pumping.
Wow, that's so fascinating. And I think like there are effective ways that we can heal our ocean. I mean, the stats are grim, the political side's pretty dark, but things heal fast. If we put the protection in place and we restore our marine environment, it can change really, really quickly. So let's take a look at these solutions. What types of marine restoration are being done around New Zealand? You mentioned active and passive at the start. Like what does that actually mean?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, most of what we've been talking about in terms of marine protection so far has been passive, right? Like you just kind of put a boundary around an area and say, let's stop doing X kinds of fishing in this area. And where that works, but I would argue that it's relatively slow. Like for us to see that change from kina barons, we didn't have heaps of kina barons, but there were barons at Goat Island in the 1970s. For that to come back, we didn't see that until the 90s. It took decades. And I don't know, I'm a impatient, uptight white guy, I guess. And I want to see change faster than that. I want to see more happen in my lifetime. So where we've got kina barons in the Gulf around these high protection areas, I think there's going to be quite a bit more active management. We're not just going to wait for those skinny, starving kina to grow old and die out, or wait for crayfish and snapper to come into those areas and grow up big enough to be able to eat them. I think there's going to be a lot of more what we call active restoration, and that will involve culling the kina. And in order to cull kina, you have to make sure that there's less than one per square meter, and they can hide and they can be tiny in little crevices and stuff. And it's a huge amount of work. It's going to cost millions of dollars. So this is damage that's been done to the ecosystem, not just by recreational fishing, but by commercial fishing as well. We're now going to have to use public and philanthropic money to restore, because we're impatient. We want those kelp forests, that productivity to come back into the system as soon as possible. We know that the kelp forest regenerates really, really fast. That's probably going to happen at quite a large scale in the Gulf. The government's put aside $2 million, and there's a lot of philanthropic money going into that space. So that's one way that we're pretty sure that works. The other one that's maybe a little bit more experimental, but has been going for longer, is mussel reef restoration. We used to have 600 square kilometers of kutai or mussel beds in the Hauraki Gulf. It's a huge area to try and kind of get your head around. Like if you imagine standing up on one of the manga in Auckland and looking around you, like it's everything that you can see, basically. It's a huge area. And we fished them to death. We trawled them all out. Reached them all out, I should say. And that started in the 1920s and sort of finished in the 1960s. And we basically fished it to collapse. There were some reports in the 1950s, I think, where they were kind of concerned about it. And they went, oh, what should we do? Like the mussels aren't coming back. And so they went, oh, let's dredge them some more to kind of stimulate it. It's just such boneheaded thinking, eh? And then what happened is once they'd basically committed ecocides and taken out all of the habitat in the Hauraki Gulf, they went south down to Marlborough and took out everything down there. And then they came up to the west coast, mostly the Kaipara, but a bit of the Manukau as well, and dredged those to extinction as well. So really quite criminal behavior. I get a bit upset thinking about it, but it's just like such a huge loss, and it was just so boneheaded. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring that back, because there are so many benefits. It's not just it's cool to have mussels and you could eat some of them or whatever, like they're food for fish, sure, but there's all the stuff that lives on and around a healthy mussel reef that's just incredible. There's so much more biodiversity. They're really exciting places, and all those mussels are filter feeding, and so what they do is sucking in seawater to get food, but then they are also sucking in sediment. And unlike other filter feeders in the ocean, where they don't want to share that sediment around, they actually gather it up, bind it up in little mucus balls, and stick it onto the seafloor as a pseudo-piecing, where other invertebrates can break it down further. So there's this huge benefit where they're cleaning the ocean for us. And a single mussel can filter a bathtub of water a day, basically, which is pretty cool. And you can imagine those bigger mussels could do even more. And that means that the whole, like, I don't know if you know the Firth of Thames, but it's a very degraded huge area of water that's quite smashed at the moment that used to have all of these mussels in it. That whole body of water, the entire thing, could have been filtered in 2 days with the mussel beds back there. And we've got basically no mussels left now. Like it's not getting cleaned. So at the same time as removing the ocean's ability to clean itself, we were also just throwing all of this sediment and stuff in it. So really quite disappointing. And there's a bunch of scientists and iwi and community that have been working to restore these beds. I've been working on it since 2013 or something. And we know the mussels can survive in cages for years down there. And there are some of the beds that we first put down in 2014 are still going today, but they're definitely not what we put in. Like there's quite a few losses. And so we're really trying to figure out how to take mussels from the aquaculture industry, put them down on the seafloor, and have them not just survive, but grow and spread out so that we can rebuild that 600 square kilometers of Kutai Reef again. That would be amazing. So that's the sort of second way. It was a long explanation, sorry. Second way that we're restoring the ocean. And then the last one, I think, is a little bit more controversial. So if you put a structure in the ocean, either at the surface or at the bottom, fish kind of aggregate around it. They like it. You're creating kind of homes or habitat and complexity. And when we're designing marine protection areas, we do look for complex habitat and go, okay, those are the best bits to protect, and that's where the most biodiversity is. And so there's a logical argument, which is just like, oh, why don't we just create more habitat, right? And that does work. And for example, around mussel farms, where we're doing all this aquaculture, we do see a lot more snapper and stuff. Those are prime fishing spots for a lot of people, and there's heaps of biodiversity around them. The problem with them is that if you just create these sort of hot spots and then people know where they are, and then people go there and fish them, and the fish are all kind of migrating to those areas, you're basically creating a fish aggregation device. So that's my main criticism around creating artificial reefs, which is a kind of a way to do marine restoration. And so it's just important that any artificial reef you're planning is not fished, basically. And then it's a fine thing to do. And you can potentially create areas where you increase biodiversity above what was even naturally there. You could do the same thing in the you can't feed fish in a marine reserve, but you can technically, there's no rules against it, in one of these new high protection areas in the Hauraki Gulf. So that's another way that you could potentially increase biodiversity. It seems a bit dodgy, just to feed the fish, but you can get 200% biodiversity abundance and stuff in these places. So it's going to be interesting to see how that's managed in the future.
So there's space to combine passive restoration of marine reserves with active restoration of creating artificial reefs, introducing mussels, removing kinna, and then allowing complexity and diversity to come back. If we did that, we could almost get compounding benefits that supercharge restoration.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a little bit of that kind of stuff happening. Māori did it for years, but before we actively managed fisheries, but you move things around in the ocean all the time. Ngāti Pā have just done a really interesting little project up Waiheke where they've reseeded power. So they've taken power from commercial industry and reseeded them into areas where they've got no power at the moment. And they've got a rahui around the island at the moment, so no one can take those power. They're protected, and hopefully they'll grow them and that'll work. So there's some quite innovative ways that we can try and fix marine environment and restore broken ecosystems, but we definitely need more techniques and more methods. I think we've got more techniques and methods for predator-free 2050 than we do, say, for shellfish restoration. So I think we need to be a lot more innovative, and we need more methods and tools. I do a little bit of play in that space, and I'd like to do more. I think there's a lot to be learned in that area.
I just want to add one point to the reef restoration. A few years back, Anna and I were riding motorbikes around Bali, and we went to North Bali, and there was this reef restoration project, and they were forming concrete structures on land, and then they were sinking those concrete structures of complex habitat into the reef, because In the decades prior, the local fishermen had used dynamite to fish, which had blown up all the coral reefs, and they literally had no reef left. And I went snorkeling around where they were restoring it, and they were also putting electrical current in there to stimulate the growth of the life. And it was mind-blowing. Like, you saw the new reefs versus the medium-aged reefs versus the older reefs that were in cages, and the complexity was crazy. Like, I lost count of the number of species. I was seeing eels. It was amazing. So it's kind of weird when you're brought to tears of joy within a snorkeling mask, but this is possible at home here. We can do it, guys. Like, we just have to have the will and proactiveness to do it.
Absolutely. There was a similar project in Long Bay Marine Reserve in 2001 here in the Hauraki Gulf. And there they sunk, I think it was 16 reef balls. So a big sort of 1.5 meter spheres with holes in them kind of thing. And it was a pretty interesting little project. It's on kind of not too far offshore. You need a boat or a dinghy or something to get out to them. They saw quite a bit of biodiversity come back straight away. I mean, there's one story about a guy, he said he went there and there were a whole bunch of mussels on the inside of one of the balls, which is really cool. Like, the whole inside was completely coated. But then he went back there the next year and there were no mussels. Like, they were all gone. There was just a few shells around the outside and a very happy little fecky octopus sitting in the middle. It was a good story. But I kind of lost those reef balls. Like, no one monitored them for more than 50 years. And I got together with a few friends and we started searching for them. And it took more than 5 dives to eventually rediscover them. But yeah, you're right. There was heaps of biodiversity. It was really exciting. There was heaps of small fish and big fish. Like, it's the best dive I've had in that marine reserve was on this artificial reef for sure. There are some other concerns, like when you create these hard structures in the marine environment, they often attract invasive marine species. That's another sort of impact that's kind of associated with climate change as well that we haven't really talked about. But we're seeing more and more of these things. Like in the Hauraki Gulf, it's a new one every year or two turning up. We're definitely not stemming the tide. They can have a huge impact on the marine environment. Been throwing millions of dollars at exotic caulerpa, which is a smothering kind of seaweed. But these reef balls were covered in Mediterranean fanworm. They've got these big spikes sticking up all over the place. And if you look at these fanworm, they are kind of performing a role or doing a job in the marine environment. And there's absolutely no way to get rid of them. If you think about how hard it is to manage weeds and pests on the land, like, it's so much harder in the marine environment. So I'm trying to make friends with them, but it is tough. Like, I go back to the rock pools that I explored as a kid and they're changed, they're different, they don't look the same.
Thank you for bringing that up with the invasive species, because it's something we're so used to from terrestrial conservation. But I think a lot of people are, again, out of sight, out of mind, blind to that's happening in the ocean as well. And yes, climate change will add to that, potentially attracting new species into our oceans that can thrive here now because it is getting warmer. Are there any of those species that we know we can get rid of? And I guess, to me, New Zealand, we have such a great mindset on making positive change with invasive species. How do you see that playing out for our oceans?
You need to be pretty clued up to manage these invasive species. And there were quite a few of us that, when Mediterranean fanworm turned up, started ripping them out or breaking them up and stuff like that. We quickly learned that they, when you break them up into fragments, all those different fragments regrow. It's like you're actually making the problem a lot worse. And it's the same with exotic caulerpa. If you distribute those stolons, which can kind of float in the water and then regrow. But yeah, they have a huge impact. The main thing that I do is I'm just curious. So I'll see something weird and I'll take a photo of it and I'll post it on iNaturalist. And like, I have thousands of observations there, and it's a fascinating, really cool community. I learn heaps about the marine environment from posting stuff there. There's some amazing minds on there, and they don't just tell me what's in my photo, but, oh, there's a blah over there, or hey, that one's a male hanging out with a female. I wonder if you actually captured this behavior. Like, there's this whole other level of insight that happens in your crappy little underwater photo when you upload, which I find absolutely fascinating. So I would definitely encourage everybody to just report sightings and get good at using iNaturalist and help grow that understanding of what's happening under the water.
Yeah, citizen science is a huge part of it, right? Like collectively, we can do a lot. And it's a way you can feel like you're positively contributing without having to carry the weight of the whole problem on your shoulders.
Yeah. I tend to do that too much, the carrying the weight thing, but it's completely overwhelming. Just getting out there too is kind of what fuels me, like it fills up the tank and keeps me going.
So, what are some practical ways, other than going on iNaturalist, that individuals can really do to help our marine environments and ecosystems here in New Zealand?
There are lots of other sort of citizen science methods. One of my favorite ones is the Marine Metered Squares project, where you can just choose a random square meter in the intertidal zone, whatever, and just go and count what's in it. We have surprisingly just not enough people doing that. So we still don't have a really good sense of how some of these areas are changing. So it'd be great to have more people just get out there and monitor their local rock pools and soft sediment ecosystems as well. I'm a huge bird nerd, and we've got an app called eBird that we use for really monitoring bird life around New Zealand. And it's quite good because we capture abundance there. So we count the number of birds. And there isn't anything kind of similar for underwater for fish. And there's a few kind of problems with trying to do it with fish because, visibility changes so much and different people are not so good at IDing things. And there isn't that understanding that we have with birds. But yeah, there's potential for somebody to do something interesting in that space, which would be really useful. But still measuring seabird productivity is really useful because seabirds are like sentinels for the ocean. They tell you what's happening under the water. Shorebirds can tell you about what's under the sediments in those intertidal areas, and seabirds can tell you how well your fishery is going because you can look at how productive they are. I count all of the shag colonies in my wider area. I just go out and do nest counts, and I can watch them go up and down and infer things about what's happening in the marine environment.
That's awesome. I like that. That's really cool.
And it's also like I do a lot of bird monitoring as well. It's a fairly easy way for people to get into it and contribute and just log their observations while they're out there in nature using their backyard. And I think there would be a lot more knowledge and I guess guesstimates that we could have of what's happening if more people would start jumping on that bandwagon and just logging what they're seeing. There's a lot. You can kind of piece together the puzzle quite nicely.
Yeah, I just want to add a point here as well, which is I'd love it if we all were actively part of the solution, but just getting into the marine environment and getting into nature in general and nurturing your relationship with nature for your own interest, your own well-being is also important because we are so addicted to screens these days. We have so many pressures in our modern lives, and the willingness to actually care for it comes from a connection from it. So even if as a minimal thing you do is you just enjoy this beauty that's around you, that's a great place to start. You don't have to go from 0 to 10 overnight. If you're not like, this is my life, that's fine. I think just having a relationship with the taia or the natural world is a great place to start if you're earlier in your journey.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I mean, one of the things I've started doing recently is I want a kind of a low impact way to be out on the ocean on the other days that, not the perfect days where I want to get further offshore. And so I've started taking photos of the seafloor from my kayak. I look like I'm fishing, like I've got just basically a GoPro on a piece of string and I'm just dropping it over the side. But I've been finding that absolutely fascinating. So I've been posting my photos and mapping and classifying all of these habitats from these GoPro photos. And I've got a website, I'll give it a plug, seafloor.nz. And if anybody wants to help and wants to get involved in it, I'm finding that a really enjoyable thing to do on the ocean that has significant citizen science value.
I think there's so many things one can do, and you're doing some amazing mahi, Shaun, up in the Hauraki.
Hats off to you.
Yes, Hauraki Gulf way. Hats off for sure to you. It's a tough job. I think we established that today. Lots needs doing, and it can be confronting, but other than taking seafloor photos from your kayak, which to me sounds like a lot of fun, what keeps you going and drives you forward to continuously pursuing the hope and the change we want to see for our marine environment?
I guess it's emotional stuff. Like I used to be mostly driven by anger from like bad decisions being made in the environment and probably like loss as well. Like there's a responsibility that comes with knowing and understanding that loss. And that I find that motivating. But this year's been particularly tough, especially with this government, and try and find new ways to kind of emotionally get myself out there. Like I think what you're talking about, like just loving the environment and just getting out there because you want to do something good, being regenerative is a bit headspace for it. So I think I'm trying to reframe it more like that in terms of motivation. I get a lot of good feedback all the time from the things that I do, which helps as well.
That's awesome. And what does conservation mean to you?
I'm not a huge fan of the word conservation. Like to me, it's kind of like it's the minimum that you should do kind of to be a good ancestor. When I think about how much we've lost, not just in the ocean, but even on land, 90% of our wetlands and stuff like that. I don't just want to conserve them. I want to restore them. So for me, words like rehabilitation and restoration are more inspiring words that motivate me more.
Fair enough. I think restoration kind of hints at we're actively involving in making things a better place, right? So I think that's probably a very good way of looking at it, stepping beyond best practice.
Yeah, beyond the minimum for sure.
Yeah, I keep coming back to this thought. I think it was from Robert Venel's book, Secrets of the Sea, about imagining the first humans that would have arrived here and the continuous streams of gigantic snapper, and you couldn't walk anywhere without standing on just solid seashell beds. Like, I'm imagining a past where you can't swim without picking fish through your hands. And imagine if we had that again. Like,
yeah,
heaven on earth.
Yeah, and really with the ocean, like all you have to do is just leave it alone. It's not that hard. So I really think that there's even more than terrestrial ecosystems. There's huge promise for change in the oceans. It's a really exciting space to be working.
Totally agree. Hey, Shaun, thank you for coming on today and sharing all of your amazing knowledge and the mahi that you are doing and that's being done to work towards restoration in our marine environment. For our audience, how can they learn more about your work and the projects that you're helping with? How can they find out more and get involved?
I'm pretty noisy on the internet, so I'm pretty easy to find. Shaun Lee NZ, I guess, and you'll find my blog and stuff. I'm quite opinionated, but probably a better place to go if you want to help, especially in the Hauraki Gulf. There's a website run by the Hauraki Gulf Forum called the Gulf Journal, which I help work on. And there's a big button, I think it's at the top of the page, saying get involved. And it's a huge list of all of the different organizations doing things in and around the moana in the Hauraki Gulf.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Shaun. Kia ora.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Kia ora. Thanks, team.